welcome to Sid Caudle. He's recovered after the CPA conference.
Yeah.
He's not recovered after the Conservative Party conference. We're going to touch on that today. Well, let's touch on it now. Sid, good idea about the stamp duty, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, maybe, but you see, I think one of the things you've got to realise with stamp duty is that there's very rich people that are buying houses in London for millions of pounds, and they pay enormous amounts of stamp duty. So abolishing the tax altogether is probably not sensible. Um, it's better to increase the thresholds, in my view, and which it's a good idea to increase the thresholds. I mean, at the moment, you start paying stamp duty if you buy a house for 250,000, which is too low, frankly. I mean, if they increase that substantially, if they increase it to say 750,000, so you paid no stamp duty if you bought a house below 750, that would take the majority of people out of stamp duty and would be a tremendous help to the house market. They have said, by the way, Mel Strider said that it's only going to apply to first homes. It's not going to apply to people buying second homes. So that may well catch out a lot of people that are buying the big houses in London. So, I don't know the detail yet. We'll have to wait and see. But they aren't going to abolish the tax altogether, which is what she said, according to what Mel Stride said. So we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I think it would be a better plan to increase the threshold substantially. But I guess increasing the threshold substantially wouldn't have grabbed the headline, which abolishing stamp duty altogether did. So it was a good headline for the Conservatives.
Is he going to get her out of the proverbial? Is she going to retain her position? Well, possibly till the local elections.
Well, I think her speech at the party conference, which I listened to just about all of it, was a very good speech, and it certainly came across well. Whoever wrote it for her, wrote a very good speech, and she delivered it extremely well and got a lot of applause. So I don't think, frankly, that there's a mood in the Conservative Party right now to change their leader, bearing in mind that in the last government, they changed the leader from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss. Then they changed the leader again from Liz Truss to Rishi Sunak. And frankly, a lot of Conservatives weren't happy with Rishi Sunak. And then, of course, he resigned after the election defeat. So they then changed the leader from Rishi Sunak to Kemi Badenoch. And I don't think there's a mood in the Conservative Party, frankly, that we need to change the leader again, because they realise that changing the leader doesn't actually achieve a lot. Had they stuck with Boris Johnson and seen him through, they'd have probably done a lot better in the election than they did with Rishi Sunak, frankly.
Well, Boris has said this very week, hasn't he? We wouldn't have lost the election.
Well, whether they'll have lost the election or not, I don't know, but I think they'd have done better if they'd have just stuck with Boris Johnson, because, well, one thing you can say without a shadow of a doubt is that Boris Johnson did brilliantly as Mayor of London. Way, way better than Sadiq Khan. I mean, there's just absolutely no comparison with the things that he did, the things he introduced, the way he ran London. I mean, it was all, he did incredibly well. And the fact that he did so well meant that it propelled him to back into Parliament and to be leader of the party. As Prime Minister, he faced the massive problem of COVID, which a lot of people don't appreciate, frankly. But the fact is that he managed to steer the party into the election in 2019, which itself was a major problem, because if Corbyn had played his cards right, and had been willing to put somebody else in as Prime Minister, that Parliament, prior to 2019, was actually in the mood to not allow us to leave the European Union. And it could have happened. But he didn't. Corbyn said, "Oh no, I've got to be the leader. No one else can be the leader." And taking that line, it didn't work. But anyway, that's what happened. And uh, Boris Johnson managed to win the election in 2019 on the platform of get Brexit done, which people were in the mood to get Brexit done. So they voted overwhelmingly and he got a massive majority. The problem was December 2019 was, in hindsight, literally a month before COVID struck in January 2020. And then, of course, it came on full force in March 2020. So he was literally didn't have time really to do anything before he had to handle this massive issue of COVID closing down the entire economy. And his initial reaction was, no, we're not going to shut down, it'll blow over. But then I'm afraid people forced him to shut down the economy, whether he wanted to or not. And then he opened it up before the Labour Party wanted. The Labour Party, oh no, no, you can't open the economy up yet. You know, oh no, 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 it's COVID's still here, still with us. It'll be a disaster. We've got to stay locked down. Boris Johnson said, no, I'm opening it up, and I think he took the right decision. And did open it up. Um, but then they went for him over the parties, and frankly, I mean, okay, you can say, well, it's disgraceful that the Prime Minister is actually attending parties when he said that no parties are allowed. But he didn't organise the parties. It's not as though he said, oh, let's all have a party. I mean, it was like somebody else organised the parties for his birthday and whatever. And he attended the parties that were organised. I mean, okay, Rishi Sunak also attended those parties, but they didn't go for Rishi Sunak. For some reason, it was okay for Rishi Sunak to attend the parties, but it wasn't okay for Boris Johnson to attend the parties. I mean, in my view, they were going for him. They were gunning for him. That was the reality. They wanted him out because the media don't support Brexit. They didn't support Boris Johnson. They didn't want him to succeed. That's the reality of it. And I think the actual party issue was nonsense. It was nothing, really, and I think it would have blown over if the Conservative Party had the guts to stick with him. The whole party issue would have blown over, and by the election in 2024, people would have completely forgotten about the parties, in my view.
You say you've named some people that are within the they camp, the blob, the media, very powerful group.
Oh yeah, indeed, absolutely. I mean, and frankly, they considered that Liz Truss was even worse than Boris Johnson, and they absolutely went for Liz Truss. Now, Liz Truss did make a mistake in having this budget, which was uncosted. I mean, and when she did that budget, I said, she's now got to cut quangos drastically in order to pay for these tax cuts, because if she doesn't say how she's going to pay for them, she's going to be in trouble. And that was a big mistake. I mean, she should have immediately said, we are cutting quangos. We're going to save 40 billion and we're going to use that money to cut taxes. And then it would have been fine. She'd have been absolutely fine. But because she just said, we're cutting taxes, we didn't say how she was going to pay for them, then obviously the markets was spooked. And, the rest is history, basically.
The market is part of they then, said somewhere in the bowels of the Bank of England. They've
Well,
got a lot of power.
Well, if you think that what actually happened under Liz Truss, which was that the cost of borrowing went up dramatically, the cost of borrowing then was actually lower than it is now under Rachel Reeves. But the media aren't going for her. The media aren't gunning for Rachel Reeves, get her out, or gunning for Keir Starmer, because they're basically Labour leaning. So it's like, as far as Rachel Reeves is concerned and Keir Starmer is concerned, they're very tolerant. When I say the media, the bulk of the media, obviously GB News isn't. And the difference is that we now have some media, notably GB News and Daily Mail, who are gunning for Starmer and gunning for Rachel Reeves and pointing out all the terrible flaws in the way they're running the country.
Mm.
But at the time of Liz Truss, we didn't have that. So she had all the media against her. That was the reality of it.
Yeah, it was quick in and out, wasn't it? Bang,
Yeah.
you're gone. Last week, Sid, I threatened you with, this is the Brains Trust, and it's all going to come down on you because there was a very important article written a couple of weeks ago, actually, by Sir Michael Ellis, former Tory Attorney General. So he knows what he's talking about. And he's made various points, 11 of them actually, that I want to go to. But before the customers fall asleep, I don't, because I think it's really excellent and attacks things of broken Britain at source. It cuts the tree down at its roots, and never mind tinkering at the edges, which this particular government is good at doing. This gets at what is really wrong with Britain. And I'll go through them, Sid, and ask for your comment. With a note that says there is a ever increasing gap, says Michael Ellis, between democracy, what the public want, and what the government wants, grows by the day. And the government plans its own schemes and just goes ahead with them. The ID card is a perfect example of that. Not in any manifesto, suddenly comes out the back door. Anyway, we go on and we start with monumental reforms needed. Number one, the power of the courts and judges even. And we've got to make things more relevant in a traditional way. We've got to come out of various treaties because they are no longer relevant. Now, that's going to be difficult, isn't it? Curtailing the power of our courts and judges, is it possible?
Well, I think what's behind what you're talking about is the one world government. And you see, Keir Starmer is undoubtedly an internationalist. And I think the most dramatic example of that, frankly, was the Chagos Islands, which was just absolutely ridiculous that we were handing over the Chagos Islands. But oh, no, 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 there's an international court that has ruled that we've got to hand them over. So we have to do whatever the international court is asking. And it's the same actually when the international court ruled that Netanyahu and Gallant had to be arrested. You know, the United States said, well, what Trump did was to actually sanction the court and say, well, these court people that are making this ridiculous ruling aren't allowed to come to the United States. What Keir Starmer immediately said was, oh, yes, if Netanyahu visits Britain, we'll arrest him, or Gallant, we'll arrest them. According to the instructions of the International Court, we'll arrest them. And which makes frank nonsense of what he's now trying to claim was that he's behind the scenes been helping to bring about the deal, which is just a blatant lie. But you see, because he's an internationalist and is basically following all these international rules, I think that's what's behind the ID scheme, frankly, because most countries have got ID schemes, so they want to have international ID schemes, and and whatever the international mood is what Starmer's introducing in this country, and he doesn't care whether the people support it or not. It's part of his agenda. That's the reality of what's going on.
Interesting. Michael Ellis really has a go at Tony Blair. Basically, he says he's a constitutional vandal, what he's done. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, the law lords, remember the law lords? They're no longer with us. Instead, we get a quango deciding what should happen between judges and who should be a judge.
Yes, yes. I mean, so if you come it now down to the courts, yes, you're quite right that Tony Blair got rid of the law lords and replaced it with the Supreme Court. But then we now have a situation where the Supreme Court seems to be overridden all the time by the European Court of Human Rights, which is why the Conservative Party is now coming to the decision of saying, I'm sorry, but we can't actually continue to support this court because, the Supreme Court should mean what it says. It should be the final judgment. We shouldn't be having another court above the Supreme Court that is overriding the Supreme Court. But you see, internationalists, that's what internationalists want. They want the International Court. They want the European Court of Human Rights or an International Court of Human Rights being able to override the Supreme Court. And from my position, I absolutely no. The Supreme Court should be the Supreme Court. We should be out of the European Court of Human Rights because it shouldn't be over the Supreme Court. But this is what Starmer's heading towards. This is what Blair supports. Blair's an internationalist as well.
That's interesting, Sid, and it's interesting with another point that Michael Ellis has raised. But one has to remind people at the moment that the Judicial Appointments Commission, which is responsible for appointing new judges, etc., is so full of left-wingers as not to be true.
Yeah, but you see, this is basic Marxism, isn't it? Marxists get hold of the levers of power, and getting hold of the levers of power is the first thing you want to do, is to get into the power to appoint judges. And by the way, it's happened in the Church of England. They've actually got hold of the key position of appointing bishops is in the hands of a Marxist, a homosexual. So suddenly all the bishops that are being appointed are all left wing. And it's surprising now. We've got an Archbishop of Canterbury that frankly doesn't even believe the Bible. Because she's appointed by a Marxist, and she's probably a Marxist herself. And this is what's going on in our society. And, we thank God for GB News, because at last we've actually got a media that's willing to confront all this sort of stuff and highlight it all and tell us what's going on. And the more they expose it, the more they tell us what's going on, and the more they tell us what's happening, which is what we're doing also, obviously, on this program, highlighting what's going on. The more it's exposed, the more it'll be removed. But you see, that's also what Trump is doing in the United States. You see, Trump is very strong, and it's not just the fact that what Trump himself thinks, it's what Trump has put around him. All the people that he's put in place, including Peter Hegseth, Secretary of what he's now calling him Secretary of War, Mark Rubio, the Secretary of State, the Tulsi Gabbard, the Attorney General, all the people that he's put in place, Pam Bondi, all these people are very, very strong, and Kash Patel, who's put in charge of the FBI. All these people are taking the levers of power. And if Trump were to disappear tomorrow, if Trump were to be shot tomorrow, he's now got so powerful people put in key places in American society that his agenda would just roll on. If he'd been killed before his election, which obviously they tried to do a couple times, that would then, there would have been nobody in power in the key places of power to roll on his agenda. His agenda had not started at that point. It was still, Biden was still in power. And if Trump was removed, who knows what would have happened. But now he's taking the levers of power. And you see, this is what we need in this country, frankly, in the United Kingdom. We need someone to come in that can take the levers of power and start to change the whole agenda from the bottom upwards.
That's true. It's also true that if you look at the paucity of the present Labour setup, who would you get? What do you want? There's not one of them capable.
No, we've got to throw out the Labour Party.
ECHR is the next thing that Sir Michael has got hold of. Get rid of it. He said, you can't refine it. Now, this very week, of course, the EU have decided to get a big conference because they're fed up with the ECHR, most of the countries, and they want to refine it. Well, it's the usual European fudge. You cannot refine a law that was made 70 years ago and bring it back to life. It should be let go. Agree with that, Sid?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have my own personal experience of the European Court of Human Rights because, um, rightly or wrongly, I decided to confront the abortion zone issue. To me, it's just absolutely ridiculous that a law passed for public safety protection should be used to stop people praying outside abortion centres. But what I did was, because the particularly abortion centre in Ealing, which was one of the first ones that they had this public safe protection order around, at that particular abortion centre, there'd been a woman who arrived at the abortion centre, had her abortion, was bleeding profusely, but they didn't treat her. They just stuck her in a taxi, sent her home, and she died. Now, you see, in any normal situation, if something like that happened, it would have been a major scandal. But because it was an abortion centre, the media didn't say anything about it. They just kept quiet. So the whole thing was ignored. I decided that we ought to be publicising this fact. So I did a leaflet. I produced a leaflet that basically said, do you know that there was a woman in this abortion centre who had her abortion and then ended up dead because they didn't take proper precautions, and people should be aware of this. You should know of this before you go in. I didn't actually speak to anyone. I just put some leaflets there for people to receive. But of course, the abortion centre would have been furious that someone had turned up with a whole load of leaflets highlighting what had happened at that centre. But then, and they had cameras. They had cameras all around the centre, so they could see me on the cameras, and they saw me do it, and they found out who I was, and they came with to my house with a notice giving me £100 fine. Someone actually paid the fine for me, so I didn't. So that wasn't a matter. But at the same time, the Be Here for Me organisation that was basically saying, these people praying outside this abortion centre have been a tremendous help to us. They shouldn't be stopped. They took their case to court, and they were taking their case to the European Court of Human Rights. So I had a barrister who actually said, I can join you in this case, and you can take your case to the European Court of Human Rights as well. So I said, okay, fine, join me in the case. So I was joined in the case, going to the European Court of Human Rights. Now, the first thing that happened was that one of the judges had to consider the case as to whether it could go to the full court or not. And the barrister advised me that the judge, who I believe was from Azerbaijan, it was some minor country, he said he's one of the worst judges on the panel. He's blatantly pro-abortion. There's no way that he's going to consider your case favourably. And that's exactly what happened. So my case, which is basically that people should be allowed to be informed that there'd been a death at this abortion centre. That's all the case was about. Is that a human right that people should be allowed to be informed and should be allowed to receive these leaflets? This judge said, no, I'm not even willing to consider that case. Now, you see, it's just like, wow. So, and that judge was overriding the UK Supreme Court and any UK law. So you sort of think, hold on a minute, what's going on? So you can understand that from that experience, I'm not exactly in favour of the European Court of Human Rights.
Yes, indeed. Well, it goes on deeper, I suppose, because there are a couple of human rights acts that we've passed in this country, and these have got to go, especially the 1998 one, because there again it's restricting our freedoms.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because as I've said that before, that if we abolish the European Court of Human Rights, we've also got to do something about the human rights law in the UK, because all this human rights law in the UK was put in to apply the international human rights law to the UK law. And what judges do now is, for instance, if you've got somebody arrives, for instance, okay, you arrived in this country illegally. So I'm sorry, you arrived in this country illegally. You're from, shall we say, Albania, which is quite a fair number do come from Albania. Albania is a perfectly safe country. It's not unsafe to send you back there. You arrived here illegally. So yeah, you've got no right to be in this country. But then they say, oh, wait a minute. The European Court, the human rights law says that you have a right to be with your family, and you have some family in the UK. So because you have family in the UK, even though you arrived here illegally, and even though it's perfectly safe to send you back to Albania, we can't send you back because of the human rights law that gives you a right to be with your family. And by the way, that was actually applied to Abu Hamza, the guy who had a hook, who had done some incredible supported incredible violence and even engaged in incredible violence in this country. The courts ruled because he had a right to be with his family, he couldn't be sent back to the country that he came from. So that's an example, if you like, of human rights applying, and that's an example of a law that we would have to say we've got to repeal that law completely because it's not being applied in a way that is reasonable or sensible.
We go on. Lefty judges, and don't forget that's the vast majority, in various degrees, some extreme left, others lefty, and judicial reviews, which is when the Prime Minister say, oh, well, yes, let's kick this into the long grass and have a judicial review, gets rid of 2 years, even up to 5 years, that does. This has got to stop.
Well, I mean, I think the principle of judicial review is not a bad thing, frankly, because I think see, all the judicial review does is to say this personal authority or this public organisation has made this decision, and I believe that they didn't have any legal authority to make that decision. So I want the judges to review the decision that's been made. Now, in principle, it's right that that facility should be there. I mean, because sometimes authorities, even the police, the police at the moment are arresting street preachers and arrested numerous street preachers, and not a single one has been convicted in court. Now, if someone is arrested by the police but not actually taken to court, which happens, somebody can come along and say, well, I want a judicial review of this decision to arrest me. And you can actually take it to court. Now, you can't just get rid of judicial review. Absolutely not. But you can look and say, well, is this whole matter being abused? And are some judicial reviews being done in a way that is frankly unfair and unreasonable? But we mustn't do away with judicial review completely.
Sticky one this for you, Sid. Get rid of Supreme Court. We're not Americans. We want Parliament to rule.
No, it's Parliament passes laws, but the judiciary then interpret the laws. Now, sometimes you see, I like the way that Lord Denning used to do things, because he always used to say, okay, what was the intention of Parliament? So he didn't just look at the words, which unfortunately most judges do. Most judges just look at the words, see what the words say, and apply what the words say. And sometimes when you do that, it's anybody that's studied psychology knows that sometimes the words can be applied in more than one way. I mean, so sometimes Parliament can intend one thing by the words, but they're actually being applied somewhere differently. An example, by the way, is what I've talked about earlier about these public sector protection orders, because the public space protection orders, because what they were intended for was to stop unsocial behaviour in city centres, people using drugs or people getting drunk, and then the police had the authority to literally to remove people from a public space, to protect it, but because from drug addicts or people that were drunk. It was never intended to stop people praying outside abortion centres. So a judge that was applying the intention of the law and not the wording of the law could say, I'm sorry, that's not the intention of Parliament, and I am not willing to use that law to, that law is ultra vires. It's beyond the power of the council to use that law, and I'm going to overrule all the council decisions on those grounds. But instead of that, they've looked at the wording, and on the wording, they say, no, it could be applied on this wording. This is a public space outside an abortion centre. It is something a council can protect, and I suppose some people could consider the prayer is harmful. So, we should stop people praying outside abortion centres and, the law can be used. No, I'm sorry, if you apply the intention of Parliament, you get a completely different result. And I think that's where things can be changed, not getting rid of the Supreme Court altogether. No, no.
Okay. Civil service reform. Root and branch. Government to appoint its own mandarins. Now, again, this is the US system. When you come in and you get rid of Biden and you get Trump in there, Trump brings his own civil servants in. So you've not got a constant battle, if you like we have with the mandarins in our civil service. Radical, that one.
Yes, no, I think it's difficult, you see, but this is where Trump has benefited so much from having that 4 years out when Biden was president, because when he came into power the first time in 2016, he wasn't prepared, frankly, because he didn't expect to win. So he's now won the election and he's now coming in with the power to appoint literally thousands of people, as you say, but doesn't know who to appoint. So he's very, very dependent on Mike Pence, who he thought was a reliable vice president, who knew the inside of Washington, who knew the people, and made numerous recommendations to Trump on who to appoint. And by and large, Trump took his advice. It would then turns out that actually Pence was a snake. He was actually part of the deep state and put in there to monitor Trump and to steer him rather than to help him. So that's why there's a lot of people that Trump appointed in his first term that turned out to be absolutely terrible. But you see, having had 4 years out, to actually having now had the experience of being inside himself for 4 years, he now worked out who he needed in power, who he needed to appoint, and was able to go very deep in terms of the people he wanted in place and the people he wanted in power. And he came in 2024 ready to absolutely remove the deep state, put his people in place right across the board. And like you say, he had the power to do it, which in this country we don't. We have a professional civil service. So no, I think it works if you've got strong leaders that are ready to and know who the people are that they need to put in place. It doesn't work if you've got a weak leader. If you've got a weak leader, then they'll just run all over you. You just ended up with terrible people.
Illustrated by, yes, Minister, of course.
Yeah.
Next, abolish, and this is about the police, operational independence for the police. Have it controlled by the government, in other words.
Um, well,
There's lots of police around and lots of units of police. I think everybody agrees there's far too many constabularies. I think it's 17, isn't it, Sid?
Well, yes, there are. Yeah, I mean, but you see, if you take the biggest, which is the Metropolitan Police, I'm incredibly critical of the way they're operating at the moment. But if they were under the control of Starmer, under control of the Labour Party, it would probably be even worse. At the moment, they're under the control of Sadiq Khan, who is pretty awful. But I don't think the problem is operational independence, and I don't think it would be better if it was under the government, frankly. I think the problem is probably too much political control of the wrong sort. That's the reality of it. I did have a friend, by the way, who was the police commissioner for Derbyshire, one of the constables, and she actually did some excellent work. In that role, she was a conservative, and she did an excellent role. I mean, and it was merely her husband who was a friend of mine, and I talked to him a lot about what she was doing and what was happening and what was put in place, and she did some great work. So having some people democratically elected to oversee the role the police are doing as police commissioners is, if you get the right people in place, greatly strengthens the police. Having it all under control of government is probably not a good move at all.
I've got an easy one for you next to give you a bit of a rest. Protect free speech, use common sense, and not hate speech.
Well, you see, one of the problems at the moment is that the police, which we've just talked about, are actually applying non-existent laws. So, for instance, as I've said, that they're arresting street preachers now on the grounds that they've caused offence. But then when it goes to court, the court said it's not against the law to offend somebody. So the police are spending their time arresting people, but it's never against the law. And we've had this situation as well in demonstrations. I mean, we just recently had people arrested in demonstrations for literally saying with a slogan, "I support the Jews." And the police are arresting them for saying, "I support the Jews." And it's like, but then they're like, well, you can't go take somebody to court for holding a slogan, for holding a sign saying "I support the Jews." I mean, so they're arresting people for non-crimes, and it's not hate. It's not hate at all. So what they're trying to say is hate isn't hatred, and what Christian street preachers are saying isn't hatred. I mean, it's not hatred, I'm afraid, to say I believe that homosexuality is sin, or I believe that Islam is a false religion. It's not hate, it's expressing a valid point of view. And yet, all this does need to be overhauled. Absolutely. We do need to enshrine a lot more clearly in our law exactly what is permissible and what isn't. Unfortunately, if they try to do it with this terrible Labour government, we'll end up with much worse law. But if we have a decent government, then it's something that a decent government does need to get to grips with.
House of Lords, reform it, but give it power as a revising chamber.
Well, yes, I mean, our policy, as you probably know, as I've said before, is to have a House of Lords that is elected by proportional representation with no threshold. So we have the House of Commons elected by constituencies, I mean, it's first past the post, but you have a House of Lords revising chamber, which is elected by proportional representation with no threshold. So you have a massive variety of different points of view, and you don't have one party in power. And if you do it that way, if because they're elected, they can have more power, and because they're not just controlled by one party, you have to seek for consensus and you have to try and get consensus. And I think that's absolutely the way forward. Having a House of Lords that is simply by people appointed, having, well, they're very often retired people that have been in the House of Commons and now, or been in government indeed, that are now retired, so they go to the House of Lords. I mean, some of those people have got a lot of experience, and some of those people may well stand for election and gain election. But it does need reforming because there's no other, well, there's no other country as far as I know, but I mean there may be some countries somewhere, but the vast majority of countries don't have second chambers that are unelected. I mean, the second chamber should absolutely be elected.
Right, lastly, Sid, before you have a little rest, abolish the UN. There's 193 members, but only 24 of those have got, as a country, a true democracy. We need an entirely new body
Yes, well, you see, we do need there's a League of Nations, which is what it was before it was the United Nations. So we do need to have this body that brings nations together to discuss and to debate. Unfortunately, what's happened right now is that the head of the United Nations is a socialist and has steered the United Nations in totally the wrong direction, frankly. So the way it's operating now is just terrible, terrible. But you see, this is because it's because we got the wrong leader. You see, we've seen from the United States, you change the leadership and you get a dramatic different result. If we change the leadership of the United Nations, we could have a dramatically different result in the way the United Nations behaves. And frankly, that's what the problem is, not the existence of the body. But the way, if it continues to operate as it is at the moment, frankly, I think Donald Trump should take away the funding of the United States. Another country should have a right to withdraw their funding because of the way it's operating.
Well, you've got 9 out of 11. That's a pretty high score. Well done. But points to think about, and some very, very valid points. Let's go to Spain. Here we are in Spain. We think we've got problems in the UK, which we have, but again, because of a really left-wing government that we have in Spain, even more left, if it's possible, than United Kingdom, in that the opposition parties are also leftists. And they're putting laws through about many things that, would never be put through in a right, left, middle society. A priest is in real trouble after expressing his views about Islam, and he's been called an infidel. The Muslims can do that to him, and yet if he speaks the gospel, which he did, this priest, he is subject to a jail sentence of 1 to 4 years. Now, this is going through at the moment. The leftists strike again.
You see, what's really terrible about this is that the test is not did he speak the truth? The test is did he cause offence? Now, you see, if you have the test, did you cause offence? That has to be absolutely, totally the wrong test. The test should be, did you speak the truth? And if someone is saying something that is true, even though it may be causing offence, then sorry, it cannot be against the law to speak the truth. I mean, as a Christian, you'd say, we are always called to speak the truth. And if you put somebody in prison for speaking the truth, then what you're doing is absolutely, totally wrong. And you see, most people don't grasp a simple fact that in Islam they've got this concept called taqiyya, which is a good thing to lie to disbelievers to gain an advantage. So Muslims are not committed to telling the truth. Christians are, and Jews are for that matter, because one of the 10 Commandments is you shall not bear false witness. And of course, the media aren't committed to telling the truth. They're committed to sensational headlines in order to sell newspapers and to promote their media. So, but if the law comes down on the side of Muslims rather than Christians and Jews and promotes the idea of offence rather than truth, then you're in a terrible, terrible mess. And frankly, that's what's going on now in Spain, and what needs to be overturned, frankly, the sooner the better.
The other terrible thing that's going on in Spain, of course, at the moment is embedding into the constitution, so it's not the normal way of doing things, this, a law promoting abortion, which is pretty wide, and you can literally get abortions now, although they do say 22 months, 22 weeks, you've still got the latitude of a doctor saying, oh no, I know you got to 30 weeks, but your mental capacity is severely affected, therefore there's a note saying you can have an abortion. And to put in the constitution now, no other country except France, but France have a way of dealing with things on a different plane, don't they? But the rest of Europe is very anti forming this as part of a constitution. The left is again, as I previously mentioned in the last item.
Yeah. Well, you see, again, this brings us down back to truth, because you see, the truth is that life starts at conception. That's the truth. And the truth is also that a baby has a different DNA from its mother. So a woman can say as much as she likes, my body, my choice. But the fact is, it's not her body. A baby inside her has a different DNA. It's not part of her body. It's a new life that has a right to live. And then what we're promoting now in the UK is the heartbeat bill, which has been promoted a lot of times in the United States. And you can detect the heartbeat of a baby after only 3 weeks gestation or 21 days gestation. Now, you see, if you pass a law, you see, if you focus on the heartbeat, it proves and shows that you have a life. It's not just a clump of cells. Abortionists like to say, "Oh, it's just a clump of cells. It doesn't matter. It's not important." But if you say, "Well, it's got a heartbeat and a brain," then you realise, this is a baby. It's not just a clump of cells. So again, the focus should be there. But abortionists basically have to lie in order to promote what they're saying and doing. And by the way, just this last week, I was looking at a film of somebody who was involved in doing abortions and had now repented of it and turned around completely. And he actually described what's involved in doing an abortion and talked about tugging and tugging hard and pulling out an arm and pulling out a leg and then getting a spine. And sometimes you get a little face that looks at you. And he basically says this is what's involved in doing an abortion. And it really brings to life the fact you're dealing with a human being. And I'm sorry, we need to focus on the truth. The truth is life starts at conception, and a baby, an unborn child, is a human being. And every time you kill an unborn child, you're taking a life. That's the reality of it. And no life should be taken. And the other thing, by the way, which people won't focus on who support abortion, is that the terrible psychological effects on a mother of killing her baby. And many people talk about trauma for the rest of their life because they've had abortions or an abortion or abortions.
Right. Mr. Trump has done it so far. Let's see how things go. But Mr. Starmer is not covered in glory. He made a terrible move when he recognized Palestine and Hamas, basically. But now he's trying to take credit for all he's done. And what a nonsense. And the European leaders are queuing up to be in Egypt to take credit, but certainly Starmer has no credit. In fact, the ambassador, the US ambassador to Jerusalem, has actually called him, and I believe he's right, delusional. You're delusional, Mr. Starmer. And if you think you had anything in getting this lot together, you were more of a hindrance than a help. Straight words, Sid.
100% yes, I totally agree with you. It started off, by the way, with this Barbara Widdowson of saying, "Oh, we did a lot of work behind the scenes to get this deal through," and that's what Huckabee, as the Israeli ambassador, said was delusional. But actually, Starmer said the same again yesterday. He was actually being interviewed about Blair being involved in the committee, and he said, "Well, I've not been asked to be on the committee, but we've done a lot of work behind the scenes to get this deal through." And because he said that, that's why Trump snubbed him when in the actual ceremony. So Trump is standing there at the microphone. It's like, oh, where's the United Kingdom? United Kingdom. So Keir Starmer steps forward and says, oh, nice to see you here. And then Starmer thought he was being invited to the microphone to talk. But Trump then stands in front of him and says, oh, he's only been here for 20 minutes. These people have come at very short notice, and don't really know what's going on, and then carries on with his speech. Interestingly enough, he had invited some other people, like the president of Pakistan, to the microphone and asked them to talk. But he didn't let Starmer talk, and I'm sure that the reason was that Starmer was trying to claim the glory for what had gone on. Trump knew that he hadn't been involved at all, so he just publicly stumped him.
Back in your box, Sir Keir, very much a moment like that, wasn't it?
Yes.
Move on to more serious matters, Sid, finally, which of course is footy. And I think there's something in the word Gary that affects people and immediately makes a heavy turn to the left. And of course, we talk about Gary Neville walking down the street. This is my house, terraced house, you think, except yours truly knows that street very well. You have to be a multi-millionaire to live in it. Looks like terraced house. It's like the famous medical street in London, and indeed Liverpool and Manchester have got a medical street. And to live there, you've got to have a lot of money. And of course, he has. But he makes claims and said, well, what do we do about the flag? Well, we don't make an issue of the flag because it's a middle class plot. It's nonsense, isn't it?
Well, yes, I think he should be utterly ashamed of himself. But you see, it's what FIFA try and do is to keep politics out of football. And I think it's right that politics should be kept out of football, frankly. And when somebody who is, well, a very respected ex-footballer and now an owner of a club, although it's a relatively small club, starts entering the political sphere, as indeed Gary Lineker did, unfortunately, and speaking frankly what is complete nonsense, then I think it to a degree undermines the football establishment, and I think it's best just to keep politics out of football completely, frankly,
Yeah.
and I think everyone will be much happier if that's what they do.
Rumour hath it, after his one appearance on Dragon's Den, that they may be considering the BBC of putting him there in a regular place. Oh my goodness me, but has that programme gone woke? You won't believe it. Unless you can get a tear jerker asking for some money, they very seldom get back to the original precept of putting a person on the spot and seeing if they're capable of running a business. Well, that's the BBC, of course. We've got to mention the EFL, English Football League, because of, well, stamp it out, fan abuse. Now, this happens on every terrace in the land, or pretty much so. They stopped 2 football matches this last weekend, Sid, because some idiot in the crowd was making abusive remarks of a racist variety. Now, what is going on here when football matches are stopped for various minutes, half an hour, whatever it is, just because some idiot shouts from the terrace? What happens to the policing by the clubs to remove that man from the terrace and ban him from the game and several other games at least? Why do we have to stop a football match?
Yeah, I think racism is terrible, frankly, and if a player on the pitch, is being harmed by racial abuse and upset by racial abuse, and it affects the way in which they're playing, then I think it's fair enough to stop the game, frankly. I wouldn't condone any racial chanting of any sort. And I think it's absolutely right that anyone who engages in racial abuse should be removed and also not allowed to attend any future matches. It's absolutely right that that sort of thing has to be stamped out. I mean, if there's nobody on the pitch that's being affected by it, then you think there's no reason to stop the game. But if someone on the pitch is being affected by it, they should stop the game. Yeah.
Well, you could always say, "Oh, we've hurt his feelings," but I think football matches are stopped for too many reasons, especially this head injury, where clearly a player has gone down looking for a penalty. Oh, he's hit my head, got nowhere near it, and everybody stops while the trainers come on, the doctors come on. It's gone too far. It's woke again on steroids.
Well, you see, fortunately, we now have you know, footballs that have a lot, a lot less effect on your head than the old footballs did. But the truth is that footballers in the past, in a number of cases, have been seriously affected by head injuries, later on in life when they stop playing. So if there is a genuine clash of heads on the football pitch, then the game should be stopped. If there's not a clash of heads, if it's just somebody that's gone down and holding their head, then think and the referee thinks there's been no clash of heads, then it should be just play on. But this is it does happen sometimes. I've seen it where literally a footballer is heading another footballer's head, and it's like and both are seriously hurt. When that happens, then they should stop the game.
Before we leave finally football, we've got to say to the authorities, get it right about this international weekend. Nonsense. Again, we've been out without sport, or the majority of sport, for 2 weeks. And boy, the columnists have been suffering something rotten. The papers are empty. And okay, it's the most important sport, but really, everything stops because we've got to watch the Falkland Islands or whoever, and there's another one coming on for next year. We can't have stupid international breaks, but they're actually, I believe, I've been told, thinking along the same lines, and within 1 or 2 seasons, this nonsense will stop. Hooray!
Well, England are playing Latvia tonight, and if they win, then they will qualify for the World Cup finals. And I think a lot of people will want to watch England playing Latvia, although Latvia have only just drawn with Andorra, so it should be an easy game for England. But nevertheless, I think the last game they played brilliantly. So I've got no problem with international breaks, and there is a case for saying at the moment the rule is that for League One anyway, if you've got more than 3 players that are on international duty, then the game can be cancelled. I think that's probably too low a level. I mean, they could put it up to 5 or 6 players on international duty and then play more games on that basis. But for the Premier League, where you've literally got probably 12 or 13 players that are on international duty, I'm sorry, but you can't go ahead with Premier League games. Whether you could go ahead with most Championship games, that's another matter.
I think the idea is to let them play the minor countries and then bring them in, whoever qualifies the top 2 or whatever, to the real competition after they've done their bit. That's all right because we won't be losing our top teams in the Premiership, etc. Sid, run out of time completely. Covered a lot today. And
Yeah.
you look very tired. I must leave you for some rest.
Okay, thank you.